I mean, this is an adventure because, yeah, we created the music and the text, and then you create something on paper. He's actually Charlie Parking. It's Parker's talking about that. This is a big task to get the music on the paper, but then there's another big task to get the music away from the paper again and put it on stage. And it's just marvelous how that process develops. And this was a very beautiful production. I didn't see the rehearsals. I came here and experienced it like you for the first time. And I'm very happy about it and very moved about the performance of these great singers. And yes, as a composer, you're very grateful if something like that happens, because you put a lot of effort in it. It's years, like we worked on it 5 years, and then finally comes to, yeah, you see it on stage, and it's 90 minutes, 5 years in 90 minutes. And yeah, it's an amazing experience, and I'm very thankful for that.
That's wonderful. Bridgette, do you have any immediate thoughts?
Well, this is my first time in Phoenix, or my first time in Arizona, so I'm very, very happy to be here. And though, as he mentioned, we've seen this opera done a few times in some other cities, it's different everywhere it's done, and it's always exciting to see how it's interpreted by different singers in different theaters, different directors, and I'm very pleased. I'm always surprised, and I'm like, I'm very, very pleased, and certainly humbled and grateful to every time I have this experience.
That's wonderful to hear. Would you both give us a little bit of an insight into how this idea, how this concept came together, and then perhaps how each of you came to the project, and what that process was like, just briefly?
So I met Corrado Rovaris, which is the musical director of Philadelphia Opera in Lausanne, Switzerland. I'm originally I was born in Switzerland, and I moved to the United States in '92. But I still have connections to Switzerland, obviously. And I was composer in residence there in Lausanne, and he was conducting the opera company there as a guest conductor. And he came to a concert that I gave with orchestral musicians, a chamber music concert on a Sunday morning, I think. And then after that performance, he was, I guess he was impressed. He came up to me and said, "Hey, Daniel, you have to write an opera for us, for Philadelphia." And I thought, okay, that's what he's saying on Sunday. On Monday, he forgot about it. Yeah, that's a part of the business, that you get very excited and then you start to forget about it. But he didn't forget about it. He called me up and said, "Hey, Daniel, I'm really serious about that. We have to think about it. You have to write it for Lawrence Brownlee, the tenor Lawrence Brownlee." And then we tried a first libretto that didn't really work out. And then I saw Lawrence Brownlee performing at Lincoln Center Jazz Society. He was performing gospel songs, and I was just watching him and listening to him, and it was amazing, his abilities as a singer, as a tenor. But on the other hand, it was also reminding me of Charlie Parker, because he had that virtuosity in his voice and the easiness of playing, singing, in this case, very fast music. So I came to my mind, wow, could be an ideal Charlie Parker, just to do something that is really not associated with opera, because Charlie Parker didn't do opera. And yes, that was the initial idea. And then we were looking for a librettist, and I was working with her brother, Michael Wimberly, which is a great jazz drummer. We were working over in Germany together and preparing things also in New York City. And then he told me, "Listen, my sister is a playwright, and the family knows about Charlie Parker." And he told me also a story that probably Bridgette can tell much better later on, and about his family connection to the fame of Charlie Parker. And then we got together, and then we started to develop the libretto. I mean, Bridgette developed the libretto, but then it became a process where we really had to exchange information and work on the piece very hard. That was sometimes not so easy, because also for Bridgette, it was the first time to write the libretto. She's a playwright, and libretto and opera is very, very different from theater. There's a completely different tempo of the language, and you can sing the same text or different text in different voices at the same time. You can sort of superimpose different texts at the same time, something you don't do in theater. And the text moves very slowly. That's the disadvantage. I mean, if you want to say something and you sing it, it takes about 4 times longer. And then you repeat parts of the text all the time. If you do that in theater, people think that you're probably crazy or forgetful or something like that. And in music, you have to do that in order to make the text more or less understandable, because musical moves, music has a lot of repetitions in it anyway. So you use the same words twice, and all these little technical aspects were, I think, new to Bridgette. So we went through this process together. But now I just want to hear what Bridgette is saying. Telling us about this process we went through.
Well, for me, when you're going to write about somebody that has lived, you have to really write about the person that lived. So it meant an extraordinary amount of research. I tried to read everything I could find about Charlie Parker, watch all the videos of him, and read books about people that wrote about him. Charlie Parker never wrote an autobiography. He didn't speak about himself that often. All we knew is that he could play, and he was a great improviser. He was certainly such a moving, talented saxophonist. I had heard of Charlie Parker since I was a little girl, from my mother and my grandmother. Her twin brother, my uncle and Charlie Parker were both born on August 29th, only 14 years apart. And he wanted to be Charlie Parker so bad that he not only learned to play the saxophone, he also started using heroin. So my grandmother hated Charlie Parker. So I didn't know who Charlie Parker was, but I knew he wasn't good. And so when my brother mentioned Daniel to me and this opera he was going to write about Charlie Parker, I said, well, I've heard that name, but that's all I knew about him. So I had to find the truth about Charlie Parker as much as I could, and the people in his lives. And so what I found was that as a woman, I understood the women. So his mother, his wives, the Baroness, and the tragedy of loving him and the tragedy of losing him because they loved him so much. His mother idolized him. She said he was the most handsome baby in the world that she'd ever seen, and she cherished the ground he walked on. She did everything for him. He would rehearse the saxophone for 15 hours a day as a kid. He could play better than anybody as a teenager. He was a professional saxophonist, like 16, 17 years old. And the saxophone was his true love. And unfortunately, I don't think any of the other women, including his mother, really understood that. It's a tragedy for somebody to die at 34 years old. And so in writing this, is a lot of stuff. And it was hard to shrink it down because what do you keep? So in writing something, even writing plays, you have to find the story, the beginning, the middle, and the end, and connect them together to ideally make it an enjoyable, informative work. So I hope we've done that.
I certainly think so. Thank you so much for that perspective. And now we're going to open it up to your questions. So if I could just have your hands, if you have a question you'd like to ask, I'll come around to you.
First off, welcome to Arizona. We love
Thank you.
and I loved hearing you talk about the creative process. I loved the choreography. Was that part of the original concept?
No, that was something that was added for you here in Arizona. I didn't know about that until I came here, and I loved it too. I saw it for the first time, so I was sitting in the same boat like you.
That was something that was incorporated for the first time here. The dancer Dubois Akin is a jazz dancer and choreographer, so he choreographed himself and danced. That concept came from our director, Fenlon Lamb, and also Joshua Borths, who was with the company. Yes, definitely.
Exactly, and the bebop and dancing are very connected. There were bebop dancers at the time in the 50s, people that could actually tap dance or dance like him to this music, which is very fast-moving music. So this was not like a very popular dance like foxtrot or something like that. It was only for professionals.
What I could not help throughout the opera of thinking of Edith Piaf and wondered if there was any reference to her in the development of this. And my second question is the classical that Charlie so appreciated and the jazz. Maybe you can help me understand how that came to be.
I had no idea how I was going to approach this until I read everything, and just simply, it was just the women. I didn't reference anybody else. Those women, his mother in particular, she has 10 pages. I think it's the only 10 pages that she's ever written about her son. The way it was heart-wrenching. It was years after his death. It was just like it happened a second ago. And once I heard her story, I thought about my own grandmother and her son, who OD'd on heroin, and I just knew, wow, it's got to be told from the emotions of a woman. So.
Yeah, and the Edith Piaf part, I mean, je ne regrette rien. That was, it's in a way, it's also a message here in the opera. That's right. And, you know, the timing, you know, the 50s, and that's also the same thing. And also a kind of aesthetic, which is different from the classical aesthetic, you know, an anti-aesthetic to some of the classical singing. And that's also what you heard here. You know, some of the singing went away from the traditional opera singing, classical singing, incorporating jazz and maybe also chanson from the 50s or Kurt Weill type of singing. So that's probably what you're referring to.
A question for Bridgette. How does writing a play and writing the libretto for an opera differ?
Oh, a gazillion ways. Plays are spoken. You follow a character the same way you do in an opera, but you don't have to worry about can they sing or not. And you have a lot more choices of which actor can do a role, which here, you know, especially of color, you only have so many opera singers. It is different writing because in poetry, I mean, in playwriting and in a libretto, you look for the poetry, but in plays you try to say it in a very small few sentences, and you don't repeat unless you're cursing somebody else or something. But other than that, you just simply, you try to streamline the language as much as you can, get to the point or get to the emotion or get to whatever you're trying to do, and keep, you know, the conflict going back and forth between the characters. I would say that's the biggest difference. And you have a lot more space and a lot more pages you can use to write the story. So you can add that 97 pages, and it'll be fine, mainly because you don't have the singing that takes time and the repetition of words, or so that the, you know, music, and all the music too. We don't, you know, the music that also takes up time, even if you're not speaking. I think other than that, they're both stories, but they're just a different way of telling them. But certainly writing it, thinking about how it should flow, that's the difference.
I had to wonder, what was the composition process for you different, because you're not just writing your own music, but you are writing your own music with this shadow of bebop and all those expectations, and who knows what the audience expectations, and how did that influence it at all, your composition process?
Yeah, well, I had a big advantage since I'm a jazz player. I played all these tunes. So what I did myself, I just was writing the opera, and I just was using the music that came to my mind of Charlie Parker, and I was not really looking it up or something, like going to a book or try to copy something from a book, and just from memory, from the music that I played myself, and try to actually connect it to what's happening. So, for instance, you heard the Ornithology, so this kind of thing. And this is Ornithology with the birds. Ornithology is the science of birds. So when he was talking to the birds, the orchestra was playing Ornithology, or Moose the Mooch, the drug dealer that came in the wheelchair. That's another famous tune by Charlie Parker. So you heard some of that, and you heard around about midnight was because that was a favorite tune of Nika, who was a very close friend to Thelonious Monk, and the Baroness, where actually Charlie Parker died. But these are little quotes that just happen inside the texture of the orchestra, and sometimes it's superimposed to something else. Sometimes you have two different Charlie Parker tunes going on the same time, but not one to one, but little motives. Like, for instance, Now's the Time. I didn't use the whole tune. I just used I used it as a motive and used it in a more dramatic way, because Charlie Parker was singing, now's the time to actually write that composition. It's not the time because he already is dead, but that's what he's saying. Now's the time to write that composition. And then I said, okay, now's the time. That's actually a piece that he wrote, or Dizzy wrote. We don't know always who wrote what. So that's also the fight they had there. No, that's my music. No, that's my music. And actually, that was a little part of Dizzy Gillespie's Manteca that was in the bass line. And then when he actually converted to Islam in his life, you had a night in Tunisia. You heard them. So if you're a jazz fan or a jazz musician, you hear a whole zoo of different things there, a musical zoo of different references. But there were also references to the Stravinsky thing, to the Rite of the Spring, when he was talking about Stravinsky, and to the famous symphony in E-flat, that's Symphony Number 3 of Beethoven. You heard it in the horn. He played it very nicely today. Yes. So it's a universe of music, because Charlie Parker was. There's also a reason for that, because Charlie Parker was very interested in classical music, and he had a brain that could actually learn music super fast from paper. He just had to look at the paper, bang, and he knew the music. And when it was on the radio, he was just listening to it once, and he had it in his brain. So his playing himself was full of quotes. He was, I heard bootleg records of him playing with big band where he quotes whole passages of Petrushka, Stravinsky, and so, because he went to the music stores and was just looking at the music and stored it in his brain, and used it in his concerts. So I used that technique a little bit here to refer to the universe of music he was living in.
It's sad to lose somebody that was certainly so smart and so talented as Charlie Parker. And I want to thank this company and every company that gives us the opportunity to do this opera, so that we remember people he'll be 100. His 100th birthday will be in 2020. That that his work can stay here where when his body is gone, so his soul is still, and in those singers on the stage. And I have to say this to Daniel, that I'm so glad that he let me write this, and with him, collaborate with him on this. And I feel Charlie Parker every time I see this opera, and I hope you feel him too. And the whole thing about being a heroin junkie, and that was true. And dying young, that was true too. But we're all going to die one day, but let us all hope that we can leave something. And that's what I treasure about having worked on this and gotten to know him. And I know my grandmother is up there. She loves him now. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bridgette. Thank you.